Hello and welcome to Mini Adventures Mini. This week I painted up this female Dwarf Cleric from the WizKids line. I struggled a little bit this week, partially due to using a new tool that I was working with. I have this light assembly slash magnifying glass contraption that I got as a present a little while back, and it's been sitting on my desk without really being used, and I've been wanting to play around with it and see how it works. So I pulled it out for this painting session to see how it worked, and it's a new kind of skill, so I need to work with it a little bit more before I really get the full advantage out of it. I struggled a lot with my brush control, getting paint where it wasn't supposed to go throughout this entire process, so it took me longer to do this one than it normally does. But overall, I think we got a satisfactory result, and with that, let's go ahead and jump into the paint, and I'll see you guys again at the end. Alright, so here we are starting off with our preview images. I went with this Dwarf Cleric, mostly because I wanted to try out my new gold paint, which you'll see a little bit later on, and it's got a lot of large plain surfaces and block colors, which I thought might show it off very well, so let's go ahead and get into this. I start off like I usually do by using my scenic glue, going in across the base, covering as much as I can. Then I come in with my larger stones, trying to see if I find any that I like that aren't too big and can add a little bit more character to the base. And I do my usual steps of adding different sands, going from a rougher to finer grit, getting full coverage on the last step. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I come in with a little bit of a file and do some cleanup here and there. It wasn't too bad on this model, but there were a couple spots where it definitely needed it, so this is an important step to do every time. And even after that, there were a few spots that weren't big. But when I'm done with that, I go ahead and pull out my gray surface primer just to hit the base, since I'm trying to avoid getting any on this clear plastic effect that we have going on. But when that's all dry, I come in with my usual dark stone that I like for my rock colors as a base coat. And this is kind of an example of why you don't want to use too small of a brush when you're miniature painting, even though it's tempting to use a small brush. I was using one that's a bit smaller than my normal one when I was doing this, and it took forever to color in these rocks. They did not want to play nice. So I spent quite a bit of time filling this area in and trying not to be too messy with it, while also just trying to get it done quickly. And it's just an example of why you definitely want to be using a larger brush than you might initially think. And later on through this, I go back to what I was using before, because this brush is just too small and I can't get any decent coverage out of it. Alright, moving on from there, I use the leather brown to come in here and paint the boots. I don't spend too long on this, I just put a couple of coats on them. You don't really need to spend too long focusing on something like boots. Nobody ever looks at the boots. If you spend too much time painting boots, you're wasting your time. Right, so I quickly move on from that, and I start early with the metal colors here, pulling out this gunmetal since I wanted something dark, and I go in and paint in that kind of scale mail skirt that's going on. And this has a really nice looking effect. It looks clean and shiny, and honestly this looked a little bit brighter than I was expecting for this color of mail. But that's a fairly simple color in, so once I make sure I get it everywhere I need to, also coming up and getting the axe a little bit, I move on to this oak brown, which I decided to use for the hair on this miniature. I figured this dwarf lady needed some dark brown hair. It seemed appropriate to me, and I think it worked out alright. I'm not sure I'm completely happy with it, and I might have to look into improving how I did this in the future. But it served the purposes I needed for it to do today, so we'll go with it and see if I can learn from it and do better next time. Next, I use this tan flesh and accidentally knock the miniature over. There's not too much exposed skin on this miniature, so I painted the face and the top of the chest there, but that's about all the exposed skin that she has. This dwarf armor is really big and bulky and full body coverage. Next, I come in with this matte black as just a color for the shoulder pads. It's just a base color that I'm going in there with to let it go on. It's really basic. There's not much to talk about here, but it takes a little bit to get everything blocked in. Next, I use a dragon red here to block in the colors on the cloth bits here with her shirt, as well as, I believe they're some sort of gemstone on the shoulder pads as well, but they're just to add a bit of a splash of color in with all the metallics that I'm using on this piece. This was one of the parts I struggled with a little bit. My brush control was a little all over the place on this miniature, so I had to go back and do a lot of cleanup later. But I get the basic forms on there for now. Next, I'm using this Daller Fowley Gold acrylic ink. This was something that I found at the art store. I believe it was a Michael's. I just saw it and I loved the gold color and really wanted to try it out, and this is my first time attempting to use it on a miniature. The coverage is alright. I do have to go over most spots at least twice in order to get full coverage of the gold without any of the underneath colors showing through. But overall, it's one of the really good colors of gold that I've used, and it takes a little while because there's a lot of gold that I end up using on this miniature, so I spend quite a bit of time going over all of these armor pieces. And it is incredibly impractical for a person to actually have this much gold on armor, but I thought it looked pretty good, and this is fantasy, so I don't really care. But yeah, still working on the gold here, filling in the helmet, the boots, the chest plate. Work here on the gloves in a second. Even the axe handle is gold. I probably went with almost a little bit too much gold on this one, but it seemed appropriate at the time, and I still think it looks alright. I also come back here and do a decent amount of cleanup after I get a lot of the gold in, since, like I said before, my brush control was a little bit off on this session, so I had to go back and do a lot of cleanup afterwards. But now that that's finally done, I use this demonic yellow and I thin it down into a glaze in order to coat this clear plastic spell effect that's going on. I don't want to completely get rid of the translucent quality of the plastic, so that's why I have it so thin, but that causes it to pool up quite easily. So I just put it on and I keep working it around until it starts drying and setting in the way I want it to. Overall, I think this yellow looked pretty good. However, I did kind of feel like this yellow was a little bit too flat, just having the one color despite the translucency, so I wanted to try adding a little color variation. I took this Void Shield Blue from Army Painter and I also thinned it down into a glaze and tried to apply it, and I was hoping to get kind of a mottled light blue and gold effect, and when it dried it all just kind of turned into more of a pale green, which isn't terrible as a final effect, but it's not exactly what I was going for. So this is just kind of a lesson. I believe when I was doing this it just didn't work as I wanted. Next I come in with my homemade black wash. I apply that to the hair and the male skirt. The male skirt, yeah, that one. Brings out all those nice details. I think it worked really well on this one with all those small crevices. I also apply it to my ground coverage to get my shadows in there. And I cover the boots with it as well. Just have to be thorough and make sure I cover everything that I want and that I don't have it anywhere I don't want it. Touching up the spell effect a little bit again there. Next I use my Burnt Umber wash as the wash I use on all of the gold bits, and this really did make this bright gold pop really well. It complemented it exceptionally well and really brought it out, and I was really happy with it. And this is a combination I will probably use again in the future whenever I need to do kind of a bright gold. Though in the future I might start off with a darker gold tone and use this gold as more of a highlight tone instead of what I did this time, which was just to use this one with a wash, because I felt like I could have gotten a lot more dimension out of it. When that's done, I'm going to use this uniform gray color here and just use it as a quick dry brush on the ground in order to get a bit more dimension in there. This is just something I do quick and dirty, nothing too fancy. And now I'm just going over and doing touch-ups. Then I start working here on the eyes, doing my base blackout for the eyes. This was a little bit messier than normal, so I had to do a little bit of cleanup here. Going a little bit back and forth. Again, my brush control's been all over the place on this piece. I come in with my off-white color, I prefer the mummy robes, to do the whites of the eyes. This came out alright. I was much better with this step. And once I have the whites in there, I come back in with another little bit of black just to dot in the eyes. And I feel like this is a technique that I'm getting a lot better at, and in the future or soon I might start moving on to doing colored eyes. And then I bring in those two additional flesh tones with the barbarian flesh and elven flesh to do some highlighting steps on the face. I felt like these ones ended up a little bit too bright afterwards, so I darkened them down again with another coat of wash, which then made it seem a little bit too dark, but I decided to leave it there and stop trying to fiddle with it too much. Again, some more touch-ups. Then I move on to finishing up the base. I come back in with more of my scenic glue, and I'm a bit more generous on it with this miniature than I have been on some of my others. Come in with my green flocking and just coat that over, tamp it down where I think I need to, but mostly trying to keep it loose. Just let it attach to the glue. And then I use my Vallejo matte varnish and my airbrush to give everything a thorough coating. And since I forgot to before, I come in with my black paint and just blacken the edge of the base, just because that makes it crisper and look nicer on the table rather than having that dirty white edge. And here's the final images. I struggled a little bit trying to get this through, but overall I think the final piece isn't too bad. It's perfectly tabletop worthy, and I think it'll be nice to have it on a table somewhere, so. Alright guys, thank you for sticking with me to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any feedback, please give me a comment down below. If you are interested in purchasing either this mini or some of the other minis that I have painted on the channel before, you can find that on my Etsy store. There will be a link to that in the description. If you liked it, please give me a like, and if you want to see more of my videos, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys all again here next week.